Hi, everybody. I just wanted to bring up a subject that has been really difficult for us to pass along to people in a way that inspires them and motivates them into action. And it's really understandable to me. One of the things that my husband and I are compassionate about and passionate about is human trafficking. Right now, with 27 million slaves and counting every hour that number goes up in the world. So 27 million plus slaves in the world. We're living our everyday lives pretty much unaware of what is going on. And on many different levels, we've tried to inspire motivation and inspiration in people, and we've really been frustrated that we felt like we weren't really moving people into action. And because of that, I thought I would share with you something that I'm really not too keen on sharing with anybody very often. I thought perhaps if you could hear a first count story of an experience, of a life experience, of somebody that you knew, or maybe even you don't know me, but if you could hear just a first count experience, maybe that would change your heart. Maybe that would, and not that your heart is bad, but maybe it would add something new to you that would cause you to be passionate about the epidemic of slavery in this world, about the epidemic of human trafficking in this world. When I was a year and a half old, a friend and I were, my friend, I call her friend, and she actually is a friend today. But so I was a year and a half old, and she was 2.5 years old. We were at a babysitter, and the babysitter sexually abused both of us. They were an older couple, and they pretty much had their way with us. I didn't know anything about it, and had nobody ever told me about it, I never would have known. But that really started a pattern in my life. And when I was 4 years old, a pattern of sexual exploitation and abuse began in my life that didn't end for almost 2 decades. These are one of those things that are uncomfortable to talk about. So I'm sorry if you have to bear with me. But, there is an abuse. There's sometimes a point where you would long for it to be a regular rape. And I experienced that. From the time that I was 4 till the time that I was 12, people would use on me, relatives, male relatives who are a lot older than I was, would use on me sticks. So I know this is graphic, but it's part of my story. So if you could imagine being 4 years old and having a stick torn off of a tree and shoved up your rectum, if you can imagine, against your will, obviously, if you can imagine the pain and the damage that followed, perhaps you could just have a glimpse into the tragedy that occurs to people in these situations. And it happened to me. Coca-Cola bottle used on you when you're 5 years old. But you know, I grew up in a really small town, and unsophisticated town, because I don't know any other word to say, to use. And so sticks seem to really be like the object to use. And to this day, I can't understand the point behind it. Sorry, there's like a little bug flying around. I can't understand the point behind it. But the insides of a 4-year-old, and later I was 5 and 6, the insides of your female parts are very, very tender. So if you could just imagine ripping a stick off a tree and having somebody rape a 4 or 5, 6-year-old with that, leave them bark inside them, their clothes bloody. And I went through that for years. Later, as I grew older, as I was 9, 10, 11, 12, the people who abused me grew older. And pretty soon they were no longer high schoolers, but they were college students, and bringing their college friends to do this. So in a family that's supposed to be popular in a community, I felt like somebody was not valuable. I felt like somebody who was trash that they used, because this had been happening to me since I was 1.5, but I only remembered and knew since I was 4. And this really was the theme for my childhood, and it was violent beyond belief. I would go out and sit under a tree at night for years, and we lived in the country at this time, and I would sit under the tree, and I would look up at this beautiful sky at night with all the stars up there, and I would say, and I would think, is there anybody out there and no stars who can hear me? Is there anybody out there and no stars? Who knows what I'm going through? So, the difference between me and a human trafficking victim is that I wasn't actually owned. I was a person, a child, in a really bad situation. But there was always a way out for me. And there's not a way out when you're that little, when you're that young. That situation continued until I was in high school. And when I told my family about it, they pretty much wrote me off as crazy and dramatic and called me phony. Since that moment, since then, I've never had a family that's stood behind me and loved me with the love of Christ, even though all of them, most of them, go to church. You know, I don't see the fruit. But the point is that it just took me growing up, finding a way out, and I kept seeking the same things. And what hurt me the most is that after I graduated from high school and went to college, I kept seeking out the same type of bad people that I had always known. And because I did that, I hated myself for that. I had a guy, father of my children, that hit me over the head so many times with a can of Budweiser that had imprints. If you know what the bottom of a beer can looks like, you know, the round or pop can same, but a full can of Budweiser hit me so many times all over my head with a full can of unopened beer as hard as he could that you couldn't recognize my face. Because all you could see was swollen up skin and the imprint of the beer can. And I was 22. When I was also 22 and pregnant with my first child, he kicked me out, and I was literally in the middle of the country in December, and I was due first week of January. I was 9 months pregnant with no coat and in my pajamas with a baby, and I spent the night outside in a snowdrift, 9 months pregnant. I hate that I have to tell you my story to hopefully inspire you, because my story is nothing compared to the people who are human trafficked. You see, I had bad situations, but I was never owned. Nobody ever literally paid for me and sold me. I eventually had access to college. I eventually had access to churches. I eventually had access to people who would step in and say, there's something different. This isn't the way it's supposed to be. But you see, in human trafficking situations, they're sold and they're kept hidden. And the one thing that makes me most passionate about human trafficking is that these girls and these boys and these women, they're not just raped. They have things used on them. And I can't tell you how that makes a person feel, but I'll just let you know, when you're raped with a metal pipe, when you're raped with sticks torn off of a tree, when you're raped with a log, it makes you feel subhuman. And this is happening in our city, in Springfield. This happened to me in small town Missouri. I wasn't trafficked, but it happened. But the difference is, somebody that's trafficked, they never have a way out. They never go off to college. They never have a different opportunity. They are enslaved. They are, in fact, slaves. 27 million of them. Looking up at the stars every single night and saying, is anybody out there? Does anybody care? Does anybody know what I'm going through? And you want to make that worse? They're seeing their children come into the same thing. The children that they have are brought into the same world, and it makes it so much worse. I know in the church, we love talking about edifying ourselves. We love talking about tithing, don't we? Do you know a church that doesn't talk about tithing? It's not wrong to talk about tithing. We should tithe. But do you know what Jesus says? I implore you to look it up. Jesus says, you're so quick to give your 10%, but you ignore justice. How I wish you would focus on the latter without ignoring the first. He says, how I wish you would focus on justice without ignoring the tithing. But if you're going to focus on something, focus on justice. Isaiah 58. If there is a way of fasting, choose the fasting I have chosen. Release the captives. Help the poor. Lift the bonds of oppression. In our church, we've gotten so comfortable that we like to think of captives as captives of the mind. We're captives to addiction. We're captives to society. We're captives to... I'm sorry, it's not biblical. Not all of it. He's really talking about real captives. For everything else, yes. Let's pray for one another for those things. But let's don't ignore the real captives. Those children who are being raped with sticks, with metal pipes. I cannot tell you how many times I tried to commit suicide. I can't tell you how many times I sat in a bathtub with a knife. How many times I looked at a bottle of pills and it said, if you take more than 9 in 24 hours, it's fatal. So I thought, okay, it's more than 9. Let's make sure I do the job right. I'll take 70. Still didn't work. And, you know, this is so hard for me to be this honest with you. Because I know it's not cute. I know it's not adorable. And I want to be those things to you, but I'm not. I'm somebody that Jesus rescued. I'm somebody that Jesus rescued. Literally from the pits of hell. And if he can rescue me, he can rescue anybody. But there are people waiting for the people of God to show up. What can you do? You can cut off on Starbucks. Do you need it? How many vacations do you need in a 5-year period? When you go shopping, do you need something new? You might. It's not about works, but I'll tell you what, guys. It's about embracing God. And the Bible's really clear. If we love God, we will love his children. If we love his children, we lay down everything and seek justice. I ask you to read Amos chapter 5. God says, all of you who are longing for the day of the Lord, who are longing for the Lord to return, woe to you. Woe to you means doomed are you, because you forgot justice. And Amos chapter 5 says, and this is the Lord speaking, your songs are a stench to me. Your religious gatherings and your religious feasts, I hate them and I despise them. This is God talking right now. He's talking about the day of the Lord returning. He says, if you are going to seek anything, seek justice like a rolling river. What is a rolling river? It is active. It moves. And you know what? Right now, as I speak, there's little girls being raped. There are women and men with buckets of rocks on their heads, 75 to 100 pounds in weight. They carry them day and night, night and day, 17 hours a day. That's their entire life from the time they're able to walk, because they are slaves, because somebody bought them. There's people in our country that if they try to run away from the prostitution ring that they're in, they'll get skinned alive and burned alive, little kids even. So if it was your child, what would you do? I'm just telling you guys that when I'm not the same, because I had a way out and I barely made it. I barely survived, but these people have no way out. How long will your church ignore the cry for justice? How long will you be too cool to bring it up? How long will the standard of our living be more important than other people living? Every single thing that you buy that is not an absolute necessity can help free and liberate a person. Just ask you to think about that.